What's up, everybody? Welcome once again to I Was Wrong with John Rowland. And that intro beat was by the great Matty V Beats. It's always sending me a lot of cool hip hop beats, which I need to get inspired to write to. Lately, been writing more essay article style and less rhymes and lyrics, but I definitely need to get back to that. All through my life, it's always come in spurts, that creative energy to create music. Kind of just comes in waves, but definitely something I want to get back to doing, making music with some type of a message and, producing it and getting it out there. So it is another Monday, Moral Law Monday. It is April 3rd. It's spring break where I'm at. I don't know about you guys, but good time to do some spring cleaning. That's something that I'm always trying to do, trying to thin down, get rid of stuff. But man, it's hard. It's amazing how much stuff we have that just clutters our life and builds up in our living rooms or our closets or wherever. And a lot of the stuff, definitely not stuff we need. It's just a result of this consumerist society and age that we live in, this materialist age where you can just buy a ton of, plastic toys for your kids that they only use once or twice. Although I will say that we just bought a fake food set, and my son is really enjoying that. Speaking of my son, I apologize if you hear him yelling in the background, but he is at that age where he can't really quiet himself down, and he's just kind of active. So he's in the living room with his big sister, and they're playing video games. So he gets a little excited. So you might hear him yelling in the background. The title today of this episode is Binding Back to the True Religion. And this is, again, kind of getting into defining your terms, the definition of religion, the negative connotation of it compared to the positive connotation of it, and a little bit of an exploration of my own personal experience with religion and comparing that to other people who had similar upbringings as me and where it took them. So I'm going to dive right into this and talk a little bit about, to start off, just my experience growing up. I was raised in the suburbs of California and was raised initially, baptized Catholic, and went to catechism, but never actually did the first, I believe it's called your confirmation. By the time we got to that age, which is about 5 or 6 years old, my parents had moved us to a Nazarene Church of the Nazarene. And one thing I remember noticing right away about the Church of the Nazarene is it was much less ritualistic. I'm sure I didn't know that word back then, but that's the way I would describe it now. Much less ritualistic in terms of in the Catholic experience, it was stand up, sit down, and do all these different, cross yourself and all these other things. And in the Nazarene Church, we might stand up to pray, but all they would do is say amen and then sit down. And there wasn't all these extra, steps you had to do, or like symbols or signs you had to do with your hands or anything like that. And so, the Nazarene Church, it was sort of, not a lot of pressure. I mean, I remember they would say, accept Jesus into your life, come up and kind of made a big scene about that a little bit, like with people coming up and it getting all emotional. That was one thing a little bit different than the Catholic Church. I don't really remember that happening in the Catholic Church, although that might happen, but I just don't remember, like in the masses that we would go to in the Catholic Church, it was much more formal, and it wasn't like, come up and accept Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. but I enjoyed the Nazarene church, and I was pretty bought into the Christian belief system up through high school. When I was in junior high, I was, very definitely had the idea in my mind of like, going to hell if like you did wrong or you sinned, um, and definitely um, just hold on real quick. Sorry, guys. Hey, 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 hey. Can you not like be screaming though? Emma? Why? Jesus. All right, sorry about that. Like I said, my son would be screaming in the background, but I really didn't want him screaming that much, so I asked my daughter to, hey, can you tell him to stop screaming? So anyway, sorry, that threw me off. But going through the Christian experience through the Nazarene church, we used to go to church camp a lot, and that was a lot of fun. So there was a lot of connection with kids my age, and going through this experience together. And I can remember at church camp, we would have chapel, and it was outdoors. It was on this, stadium up in the forest or whatever. And I remember having these like really strong spiritual experiences there, and at that time, I attributed it to what they were saying to us, that there was this spirit of Jesus, and it was, I could just feel it. I mean, it was definitely like an electric feeling. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that like if any group of people got together and focused their energy in that way, that you would have a similar experience. It just so happened that ours was directed at the idea of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, and this was the thing that you wanted to accept into your life in order to live the right way, and again, like make it to heaven, right? So I was like pretty straight kid, up until about 16. Like I never drank, and a lot of that I did attribute to my upbringing. Like there was sort of this fear of sinning and doing wrong and like ruining your life, which was built in from religion. And so in a way I can see how that's a tool for parents, especially back then. I don't think my dad was very religious, but he kind of went along with it. And I definitely think my mom kind of used it as a tool to sort of make sure that we were, staying on the right track. So, but about the age of 16, 17, I started like, stepping into experimenting, with smoking and drinking and questioning things. And I remember it actually was at this church camp at around that time. Probably I was 16 or 17 years old, where my sister, who was a couple years older than me, her and some of the kids of her age were talking about how this was all a myth. Like this whole story of Jesus and God was all a myth. And I remember kind of being like, wow, like surprised that she had the nerve to question it. But that sort of allowed me to kind of step into that type of thinking and really question, like, what is the truth of this story of God and religion, and how we got here, and what is our responsibility, and what are we doing here. And so a little bit after that, when I was in high school, there were a lot of Muslim kids that went to school with us. And there was one girl, don't remember her name, but she sat in front of me in this class, and we would talk about religion. And she would tell me that, Islam is the true religion. And I was like, well, like, how do you know? Like, how, one of the thoughts I had when I started questioning it is, if someone is born in a place where they don't learn about Jesus, then I don't believe that God, what I think of as the creator, a loving creator, a creator that put us here for positive reasons, for loving reasons, that creator would then judge those people harshly because they never believed in this specific story of Jesus, like if it was the Native Americans, or if it was, other, people from, other countries that were raised Muslim. It's like, I didn't believe that like they would be judged harshly because they never, had the right message taught to them or instilled in their brain. And so this all led to me, really losing my religion, and then, stepping into like wanting to learn about other religions. And so I remember after I graduated high school, I was really excited about the fact that I could now learn on my own, which is kind of funny because I could have always been learning whatever I wanted on my own. But for some reason, it took to get to where I graduated high school, where I felt like free from whatever they were teaching me. And I was able to say, okay, well, what do I want to learn about now? And so I remember I went to the library and I started checking out books. And one of the first books I checked out was World Religions. And I started reading about all these different religions at that time. And around that same time, end of high school, like, beginning college, I used to go over to my buddy's house a lot. And his dad had a book. He had a lot of like kind of esoteric books, I guess you could say, or really more like Eastern philosophy. And he had this one book called The Wisdom of the Yi Jing. And I didn't know what the Yi Jing was, but I was kind of interested in it. And I think it did explain a little bit as to what the Yi Jing was, which is basically an oracle. It's the Book of Changes from China. It's the oldest book in China. It survived the burning of the books in China. And it's basically based on this set of symbols, which they call hexagrams because they're six-sided symbols, but they're actually just lines stacked on top of each other. So 6 lines stacked on top of each other. And you get there's either a solid line or a broken line. And then the different combinations that you can make, up to 64 symbols, is the King Wen sequence of the Yi Jing. So, but at that time, I really hadn't gotten that deep into it. I was just looking at this book at my friend's house, and it was The Wisdom of the Yi Jing. And what stood out to me in that book was the story of creation. And it went like this. It said that, imagine you were God. You're all knowing, all present, omnipresent, all knowing, everything. What would you do? Right? Like if you had all the knowledge in the world, all powerful, like no one to talk to, no one equal to you, you're just this like loving force that has everything within it, and knows everything. And it's like, well, you would play a game. You would play a game of hide and seek, and you would basically start creating, and you would like break yourself apart into smaller parts and create as many different things, infinite things, whatever is potential to be created would start being created. And then the whole point of the game was that each individual piece of creation would then eventually realize that it was all part of that one piece. And so the game was for all of these individual pieces of creation to return to the original source, to basically realize that they were all from this one source. And it just was like really mind-blowing to me at the time, and it still kind of is, just a really beautiful story of like to understand like what this is that we're experiencing, what life is, what creation is, and why creation happened, and why whatever this force that we think of as God, or this original thing that started creating, why would it do that? And so I really found that to be beautiful, and that sort of led me into the search into the world religions, and specifically some of the Eastern philosophies. And so one of the things that I found myself doing was, as I looked at these world religions, was really focusing on like, you tend to kind of want to know which one was the original one, because you start realizing that they all are kind of saying similar things. Like at the heart of each of these different religions, there's like some universal truths in that religion, and that they branch across each religion. And so then you get into this idea of like, well, which was the original one? Like go back further, and one of the early ones is Taoism. And so the story of Taoism is from the book of the Dao De Jing. The Dao means the way, right? And the story goes that there was a man named Lao Tzu, and Lao Tzu was he worked for the emperor in China. I don't know which dynasty or any of those details, but the story goes that things were going kind of bad in that society, and Lao Tzu decided to leave. And as he was walking out of the town or the village or the kingdom, a man stopped him and said, before you go, can you tell me like what I need to know about life? And so Lao Tzu wrote the Dao De Jing. And this, to me, kind of ties into this idea of like going back further and further to the original source. Like what was the original understanding and belief that we've, sort of, we as we've moved on, we feel like we've moved away from it. So I'm going to read the first passage from the Dao De Jing just to give you an idea of how this is connected. It's called A Way That Can Be Spoken. A way that can be spoken is not the eternal way. A name that can be named is not a constant name. There were no names in the beginning of heaven and earth. Attribution of names is the matrix of myriad things. Whenever you have no desire, you can observe the subtle. Whenever you have desire, watch the openings. These two have the same provenance, but different names. Both are called mysteries. The mystery of mysteries is called the gateway to myriad subtleties. So the idea that there were no names in the beginning of heaven and earth, and that the attribution of names is the matrix of myriad things, that originally there was this, this one thing, this one source, and that it, breaks out into different things. And then once we start naming those things, then we see this, basically this dualism pop up of, like, again, just labeling things as separate, as different from the original thing. And that becomes the matrix of myriad things. But the original thing is the gateway to all of that, right? It's the source of all of that. And so to me, as I read these different passages from Taoism, in my mind, I'm seeing this process of this original source, and we're constantly trying to get back mentally and spiritually to what was that original source. Why, when you're asking the question, why are we here? What am I? What is this? What are we? That your mind naturally is going back. You're constantly going back earlier and earlier to try to find like what's the original thing. And of course, that's actually impossible for us to do. But that is the striving of religion. And this is why when you look at the etymology of the word religion, it is re legare, re legare, which legare is like, for example, like a ligature, right? Like to bind something, right? And re means again, so to bind again or to bind back, right? And what I find interesting about that, again, because there's a positive connotation to this and a negative connotation to this, is that you could say binding back, like it's holding you back. You could look at it that way. And there is an aspect of religion that does hold people back. You could get caught in one religion and or tie into one religion and think that that's the ultimate religion, and not see the connection and what we call the syncretism of all of these belief systems. And so if you get stuck in one of them, there is a binding back that is a negative connotation, where now you're stuck in this one belief system and you're thinking that that's the only way to achieve whatever we're meant to achieve here, however you perceive that, whether that's to raise your spiritual self, or become more connected with others and with the universe, whatever that is, or to go to heaven, right? Whatever that thought is in your mind, that if you think that this one religion is the way to get there, like as we say, that can end up being a cul-de-sac and can end up being a negative thing. And you end up, trying to force your beliefs on other people, or, thinking that other people are not going to be able to achieve this spiritual enlightenment because they're not your religion. So again, that's the negative connotation of it. But what I've come to see from the positive connotation of it is that you are binding back to the original thing, right? And this brings up the idea to me of a trauma bond. I've come to the realization that trauma bond is inherent in nature. And where do we see this? Well, for example, we see this in the birthing process. The first thing you experience when you come into this world is a trauma. And that trauma will lead you to bond, hopefully with your mother in most cases. Unfortunately, in some cases, that's not what happens. Children maybe get put up for adoption, or, and ultimately it doesn't necessarily have to be your mother. Obviously, that's the most natural and the thing that you want, to happen. You want a child to bond with its mother, to be able to feed from its mother. And but again, even if that child were to bond with the father at that moment, or any guardian, there still is the experience of that trauma that happens, and a bond created from that. And so I would compare that to the original impetus of creation as being a trauma bond, where this, one loving source splits, and there is this feeling, this yearning of wanting to get back to that we never lose. We never lose this idea in our mind, this deep-seated drive to get back to that original source. And so to me, that's where the positive connotation of the word religion, to bind back. We're trying to constantly bind back to the original religion, the true source, right? So after I got into Taoism, I went into studying Buddhism. And I mentioned this before, that I went to this Buddhist temple that's local to us. It's a Chan Buddhism. And I really was going there more for the meditation aspect of it. But then they would do like an hour of meditation, and then they would do an hour of teaching you the philosophy. And what I saw with Buddhism was, first of all, part of my drive to want to learn about Buddhism was that what I felt about Christianity was like, Christianity gives you this story of sort of like the ideal human, right? Like in Jesus Christ, that this is a guy who, they say he was without sin, right? I mean, take that for what it's worth. I mean, I never really necessarily believed that. I was like, well, maybe that's why they cut out like most of his life, because they didn't want to tell you about the time he did sin. And they want you to think he lived without sin so that you can feel guilty your whole life, like you'll never live up to Jesus, right? But they're giving you this image of this being that you are trying to live up to, and you're always striving towards, like, being like Jesus. And so, but what I found interesting about Christianity is that Christianity never really told you how to be like Jesus, right? Like, it showed you what Jesus did, but how did he get there, right? I mean, the story of Jesus going and being tempted by the devils 40 days in the desert and all that stuff, but like, what was he doing, right? Like, how did he develop this spiritual force that he had running through him? And so I kind of tied, we have this idea of prayer in Christianity where you're asking the universe to help you with something. And then you have the idea of meditation, where to me, you're more like, you're more absorbing that spiritual energy, and you are sort of strengthening yourself through this process. So that was really like my interest in meditation, was like, developing these spiritual abilities and spiritual skills. And so I remember when I went to this Buddhist temple, what was kind of funny was the monk or the nun, I forget if they're called monks and nuns, but they're women. But she said, like, she specifically said, you're not meditating to like do amazing things or like see something, hallucinate something and see some spiritual entity or whatever. Like, that wasn't the point of the meditating. Their meditating was actually just clearing your mind. And it was pretty interesting, because I thought, like, it almost felt like she was like telling me, like she knew what I was kind of thinking, like, this practice will help me to develop into, stronger spiritual powers, and to a limited extent, that was kind of what I was thinking. But I think, in the long run, that she said that because she was just trying to get you to a point of starting, but that there is a lot of spiritual development that happens through meditating. But I saw Buddhism as being Taoism in action. And it's Taoism is sort of this kind of, going with the flow type of belief system, and Buddhism is sort of showing you like how to achieve that. And remember that, even in the Bible, Jesus says that, I am the way, right? He was a teacher of the way. So it really is the same idea that Jesus is talking about. And so continuing in Buddhism, I lost my track of thought. I totally lost where I was going on that. I'll get back to it if I remember, but I wanted to tell you another creation story that I ended up reading later on. It was in a Kabbalah book. It was, I wanted to start reading about Kabbalah, and this is obviously when I'm getting more into like occult, which is kind of interesting. Like, even though I was studying Buddhism and studying these different religions, I never really tied it into the occult. But really, the occult means hidden, and studying like the hidden energies and the hidden spiritual energies that exist. And they do tie in hand in hand. Again, you can look at religions from an exoteric point of view, like a literal Christian point of view, or you can look at it more esoteric, like what is he actually saying, like what is the deeper meaning of what is being said here. In this Kabbalah creation story, it talks about the light and the vessel. And so in the beginning, there was this light, and it's not like we think of, it's sort of this just warm, loving energy, and it can be compared to love, right? And so this energy has the desire to share this love with something. And so it creates a vessel. And so it fills the vessel with this light. And the vessel gets filled with this light, and the vessel is very grateful for all of the loving energy that is being flown into it from the light. And so the vessel, feeling this loving energy, has the desire to give back. But the vessel's nature is not to give. The vessel's nature is to receive. But the vessel tries to give back to this to the light, and when it tries to do that, the light retracts, and when it retracts, they separate completely, and they're in complete darkness. and then they both have the desire to get back to each other, and that desire is so strong they come back to each other at full speed, and the vessel shatters, and that's creation. So I don't know if you can see how that ties in with the Buddhist or the Yi Jing, version of creation, but I see a lot of similarities there. And again, we would call that syncretism, where you see these beliefs in all of these religions. So the definition of syncretism is the combination of different forms or belief or practice, the fusion of two or more originally different inflectional forms. So the combination of different forms of belief or practice, or the fusion of two or more originally different inflectional forms. So obviously for me, when I lost my religion, at the end of my high school career, going into college and adult life, I kept my spirituality. Now compare that to like my sister, for example. When she lost religion, she rejected not only Christianity, but all religions. And she really saw the negative aspect of Christianity, all the bad things that had come from Christianity, which is easy to see in the world we live in. You could say that religion is the cause of all wars, obviously the abuse that goes on within like the Catholic Church and all of that information coming out, the corruption. I mean, really anything is susceptible to corruption, any belief system. And so a lot of people, when they lose their religion, they completely reject that religion. And then in a way, they reject all religions. And I find that people who have done that rejection of religion, they have a hard time seeing, when you talk about God, they automatically assume like the Christian God, and that has a negative connotation to them. But again, like if you go deeper into like the true meaning of what God is, and the one God of all of us, the one creator of all of us, the one source that we all came from, then again, you can find a more positive connotation. But it's interesting to me that in my family, my sister and I, who were basically raised in the same household, same thing, same belief systems, that one of us completely rejected it. And for me, I didn't throw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater, meaning that I always saw the positive message of Jesus in being that this is the way you are supposed to live your life. It's an example. It is, something you're meant to strive for. Not that Jesus was saying, I am God, but Jesus was saying to be like him, right? And again, this doesn't have to be a literal story. That doesn't have to be a literal man named Jesus that existed. It's just the message of the story that tends to be more important. I wanted to share an example of how these religions, the syncretism in these religions happens, and this is with the Tree of Life. I looked this up in Wikipedia. The Tree of Life, they have a depiction of the Norse Yggdrasil as described in the Icelandic Prose Edda, and you have this Tree of Life in all of these different religions. It says the Tree of Life is a fundamental archetype in many of the world's mythological, religious, and philosophical traditions. It is closely related to the concept of the sacred tree. The concept of the Tree of Life may have originated in Central Asia and absorbed by other cultures such as Scandinavian mythology and Altai shamanism. The Tree of Knowledge, connecting heaven and the other underworld, and the Tree of Life, connecting all forms of creation, are both forms of the world tree or cosmic tree, and are portrayed in various religions and philosophies as the same tree. In ancient Mesopotamia, the Assyrian Tree of Life, you've got the Uarshan Tree of Life, in the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have in ancient Iran the Avestan literature and Iranian mythology. I mean, it's really amazing if you look at this list. I mean, it just goes on and on. Everybody has this idea of the tree of life. So just an example of how all of these ideas overlap, and that it does seem that there is one true religion, one true understanding of how to behave in this world and how to live your life, and where we are and what we are, and where we come from. And the one thing I do wonder is this idea of there being like a starting point. I mean, obviously in our minds, we definitely, our minds are built to think of like a beginning and an end, but it also kind of seems like this is very cyclical, what's going on here. Creation is constantly, for lack of a better term, resetting, right? And so that's probably why a lot of this language is being used against us, like the Great Reset, that there is this reset that happens. There is this ebb and flow of creation that's constantly happening, this revolution that's constantly taking place. And so whether that means that there's some type of destruction that happens in this realm and then a rebuilding, I definitely have moved past the idea that any of this is going to be destroyed forever, or that we can ever really conceive of that even. It is possible that there is this long calendar that we're on where there is an ending to this universe. In Hinduism, there's an interesting picture. I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, and in Hinduism, in this picture, the god is like laying down, and he's, or she is blowing bubbles, and like each bubble is a universe, right? Sort of like the idea of this multiverse. So I kind of have the idea that there are multiple universes, and that each one has, the same laws, but we have different trajectories to get there. So in some, universes, they didn't build everything on oil, they built things on hemp, and had a healthier outcome, right? And in our world that we happen to be in, our universe that we happen to be in, we kind of maybe took a wrong turn, in not allowing people to use hemp, and instead we're using oil, and from the ground, and that led to a different outcome, but that like ultimately they all lead back to the source, right? Like, and again, I don't think it means like it doesn't matter what you do, but I guess on a certain level, I do have the belief that like there's just different paths back to that same source. Like we all have like this a certain amount of time, certain amount of eons to keep doing it better and trying to get it right. And that's where I see the idea of an objective morality and that things getting better, that like even with the bad turns that we take and the things that seem negative, that we can alchemize those and like move on to a greater understanding and a greater reality that we can create, because we are co-creators here. We do have the ability to pull things from the nous, from the noumena. We can create phenomenon, right? And what we choose to create is going to affect how our specific world looks. But I do think in terms of the idea of eternity, that there are multiple universes being created all the time, and that, they may look a little different because of the different choices that those beings there took, and what they did with that universe or with that world. But again, I don't, it's hard to conceive of that long-term, dying off. In the book by Bob Monroe, I forget the names of the books. Bob Monroe was the guy who he had out-of-body experiences, and he went really deep into these out-of-body experiences, into these different realms, and he ended up in this one stage where it was like it seemed like the distant past where there was like no buildings, it was all like nature and stuff, but it was actually like almost at the end of time, basically, in the end of the universe, and that these humans had gotten to the point where they could just like pick up like some dirt and like just make a piece of corn out of their hand, you know. And I just always interpreted that as like sort of being like where we had gone through all the negative and, you know, the destruction that we've caused, and we had finally spiritually evolved to this level where we were getting closer to returning to that source. And I also have this idea in my mind that like once we return to that source, there may be a period of time where we sit in that loving energy of being the one, the all, but that eventually we're going to get to that state where we get bored again and we want to start creation over again, so that this cycle just continues and continues and continues for eternity. And again, that's, you know, at that point, the human mind is limited and really grasping that. But I'm just sharing with you the way that I interpret a lot of this stuff and the way that I see it. Hopefully, you know, that might help you to you know, share, you know, what your thoughts are and how you look at it. Let me see what else I had here before I look at these comments real quick. Or anything else pressing I wanted to tell you guys about or get into? Oh yeah. Well, no, I'll save those for later. I have a couple of quotes I wanted to say, but I'll save those for later. All right. So let me look at these comments. We got a couple of comments here. Thanks everybody for watching. Sorry, you know, I'm a little off today, but you know, I'm trying to get better at this, trying to get into like a freestyle form, you know. Yeah, nice. Nate Cap. Love Nate Cap. Nate Cap, well said, John. We all deeply yearned for connect to source. Great show so far, brother. Thanks, Nate. Appreciate that, my friend. Nate Cap, you guys check him out. He's the Cubby Hole is a podcast he does. And then he has this other video series, which is that logo right there, which the name is escaping me right now, but I really enjoy those little videos, and I've been going through them. I still need to finish them, but he's basically just giving you little bits of knowledge, and I really love like listening to different people's perspectives on these same concepts. And Nate has a really good perspective on a lot of these occult ideas. So thank you, Nate, for your comment. Thanks for checking it out. I appreciate that, and I appreciate the work you do. Sorry, I can't remember the name of your video series. Oh, it's called the Outcasting with Nate Cap. Outcasting. Check it out. And then my other good friend, James Robert Cordner, you're bringing to mind the principle of rhythm. Yes, definitely. I will say that when I was looking at the Taoism again today, now that I've gone further and I've learned like the Hermetic principles, you can really see that in Taoism too. You know, it's like this, again, it's not the idea of like there is no, you know, evil, or that there's things you do that aren't destructive, but that there's sort of like this acceptance of that energy and what you do with it, right? Another way of describing this is I think of like there's like two timelines running, right? And one timeline is positive outcomes and one timeline is negative outcomes, and you can always look at the world from either way, and they're neck and neck, right, all the time. And it's always like based on like what we do with that energy. So something that appears to be evil is actually an opportunity for us to alchemize, and it's maybe something we need to it's some topic we need to discuss or we've been avoiding. And so we see this negative expression of it, but it forces us to look at it and maybe come up with a positive outcome. And thank you, James, again for commenting. I appreciate that. And I wanted to shout out James. He is the Hitchhiker's Guide to Truth. You can find him on YouTube, and he's also doing a new series called Black Pill Digest, which is really good stuff with Sean McCann. So thanks again, James, for the comment. I appreciate that very much. And I'm going to end this pretty soon, but I did want to read this quote. Now, why don't I go ahead and share my screen? let's share the screen. You know, I need a little practice of sharing the screen. I actually was considering sharing the link. I don't know. Am I ready to do that? I can share the link, chat with some folks. Let's see here. Let's share this. How does it? There we go. It says, the task is endless. It's true, but we are here to pursue it. I do not have enough faith in reason to subscribe to a belief in progress or to any philosophy of history. I do believe at least that man's awareness of his destiny has never ceased to advance. We have not overcome our condition, and yet we know it better. We know that we live in contradiction. No, hold on real quick. We know that we live in contradiction, but we also know that we must refuse this contradiction and do what is needed to reduce it. Our task as men is to find the few principles that will calm the infinite anguish of free souls. We must mend what has been torn apart, make justice imaginable again in a world so obviously unjust, give happiness a meaning once more to peoples poisoned by the misery of the century. Naturally, it is a superhuman task, but superhuman is the term for tasks men take a long time to accomplish. That's all. And that's by Albert Camus, the book Lyrical and Critical Essays. All right. I am actually going to share this link before I read the next quote, and then just see if anyone is interested in coming on here and chatting with me for a little bit. And let's stop sharing that. Do the invite. Wait, no, that's the wrong button. Invite. Boom, let's do this. I'm going to do this. Boom. I'm going to do this. Boom. Check it out. Boom. Boom. Who's going to hop on, holler at your boy? All right. I'm going to read this next quote. Let's see what happens. Okay, here. This is another good quote, and this is from my boy Rudolf Steiner. I'm a big Steiner guy. Man thinks to himself. Man thinks to himself, why need I trouble about what happens in the spiritual world? When I die, I go into the spiritual world in any case, and then I shall see and hear what goes on there. In endless variations, one hears this easygoing way of talking. Why should I trouble about the spiritual before I die? When the time comes, I shall see what there is to see. My relationship to the spiritual world will not be altered in the slightest, no matter whether I do or do not concern myself with it. But indeed, this is not so. A man who thinks in such a way will enter a world of darkness and gloom, unable to make very much of what is said in my book, Theosophy, about the spiritual worlds. For it is only by allying himself in spirit and soul with the spiritual world during life in the physical world that man can acquire the faculty of perception in the spiritual world. The preparation must be made in his life here on earth. The spiritual world is there in very truth. The faculty of being able to see in that world must be acquired on the earth. Otherwise, there is blindness in the spiritual world. Yeah, I really like that quote. You know, Steiner was ultimately trying to get people to connect to their spirituality through their reasoning and logic faculties, their thinking faculties, and that, you know, this led to freedom to, you know, develop your spiritual capabilities through your thinking mind, and therefore come in connection with that spiritual realm. And you know, but Steiner had a lot of weird ideas too. You know, well, not weird, but Steiner, you know, he believed in this concept of Ahriman. So you had Lucifer, and then you have Ahriman. And Lucifer is actually the spiritual being that's trying to pull you up into the spirit realm, like only spirit, not material. Ahriman is pulling you into the material. He's pulling you down, right? It's interesting that people talk so much about Luciferic, but no one ever talks about Ahrimanic. And Ahrimanic is actually more probably the age that we're in. I mean, we've been through the Luciferian side of it, but Ahriman is, really the entity that, defines our age, our material age. And then Steiner saw Christ, the Christ consciousness, as like the middle way, right? The middle way between these two poles. But so we had Lucifer, and Steiner believed Lucifer actually incorporated on Earth. He became he became embodied as a human, and then Christ embodied himself on Earth, and and then eventually Ahriman will come. And it's kind of interesting when you look into like who could be Ahriman. Steiner did this sculpture of what he thought Ahriman looked like, and it's kind of crazy. It kind of looks like a mixture between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. It's kind of crazy, but maybe I'll share that with you guys next time. But yeah, you guys, I appreciate you coming on. You know how we do. We're going to take you out with a little music. And I, again, apologize for the different, the different distractions here today. I'm a little bit, all over the place. But that's all right, getting in the flow. Eventually it'd be good to get on here and just kind of freestyle. Like, well, I am kind of freestyling, but I do have a little outline I'm working from. But get on here and just talk about whatever, kind of like maybe crack some jokes, do a little sit down stand-up comedy, you know what I'm saying? And then you do those lives, and then you find out the gems, and you put, it's a good creative process, right? So I think I'm going to take you guys out today. We're coming up on actually, I'm going to take you out with this video. Yeah, we did a cover of Come Together by the Beatles, and it was produced by my good friend Jason Young. Shout out to Jason Young. He's been making little shorts for me out of these videos. Really cool. Appreciate that. And also shout out to Derek Bartolicelli, who made me a little logo. I did the original logo, but he kind of made it a little different. He kind of funked it up a little bit. He's got a little bit more skills than I do. He gave me that one right there, right? The little overlay. So I like that, right? Appreciate that. That's how we do this here, folks. It's a team effort. I appreciate everyone who's, just doing stuff out of the love of their heart and out of the love of creation, and, just keep adding to that, and let's build something here. Again, eventually let's get to the point where people come on up and hit that link and come say what's up to me. But yeah, this video song produced by Jason Young, lyrics sung by myself and Mike Mattingly, the Funky Father. And this was right at the beginning of the pandemic. And we, we're basically like, come together. I was like, this is the song, like, come together. People need to come together right now. They're telling us to be separated, but obviously, no one heard this thing, but except my folks. But I made a little video for it, and I think that's a good song to go out with on this episode of Binding Back to the True Religion. All right, here we go. This is Jay Young.
He come on flat top, he come grooving up slowly. He got juju eyeball, he was holy roller. He got head down to his knee. Got to be a joker, he just do what he please. shoe shine, he got toe jam football, he got monkey finger, he shoot Coca-Cola, he said, I know you, you know me. One thing I can tell you is you got to be free. Come together right now over me. He back production, he got Walrus Gumboat, he got Oh no sideboard, he won Spinal Cracker, he got feet down below his knees. Hold you in his arms, yeah, you can feel his disease. Come together right now over me. Roller coaster, he got early warning, he got muddy water, he won mojo filter, he say 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. Got to be good looking cause he's so hard to see. Come together right now over me.
The intention of Natural Freedom League is to expand the understanding of natural law, which is based on objective morality, and to expose the illegitimacy of the belief in authority, and thus the inherent immorality of all government.
We be the Natural Freedom League, cause we become no longer unvegan. We seek in the wisdom, and that's why we did come to this prison of prism. And that's why the beat thumps, and that's why we speak up. We be the